Hello and welcome. This video is going to be about my own personal educational philosophy, as well as general guidelines, tips and tricks, that sort of thing. This is really going to serve as an introduction to myself, the channel, and the way I would go about teaching mathematics for future videos, which will cover individual mathematical topics, exponents, fractions, factoring. I'll take some requests maybe to see, what things I eventually want to cover. I personally have a background in mathematics. I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics education, secondary mathematics education, and I was a private tutor for 5 years, doing all levels of mathematics, anything from teaching little kids fractions to teaching calculus tutoring. So, yeah, I'd say I have a pretty decent understanding of a lot of different levels of mathematics and a lot of tricks on how to teach certain things. Um, Individual topics, of course, will be in the future videos. This will just be a sort of general guideline to what I would say my personal educational philosophy is. Future videos will not be PowerPoints like this one is. They'll be done on a web whiteboard, so I can actually go through and draw things like this, which will probably be a lot more convenient for everyone, more fluid to be able to go through mathematics. As for the very first slide, learning must occur within the mind of the student. This is a reality that you can't force someone to learn something. You can give them all the resources you would like, you can explain it a million times. If they don't internalize it, nothing's going to happen. So ultimately, it is up to students to internalize and utilize information, which requires memorization, making connections, a whole bunch of little tasks that they would just have to do. It's a lot more than you would expect, in all honesty. And don't forget, students have a lot of other stuff going on. There are many other outside factors that play into education, be it social and emotional needs, socioeconomic status, other priorities like jobs or families, and if they know foundational skills. That can also be a huge part of if they can actually learn new content. So, you can do a lot for a lot of students, but you can't do everything for every student. There are just things in education that are a systematic issue and can't necessarily be changed. So, it is what it is. There's a lot going on there. But a positive thing, treat students like people, first and foremost. And this is difficult to do when you're working with 100 plus students every single day. I totally understand that. That's why I really liked doing tutoring where I only had one student at a time. But try, well, it's easy to think of students as just immature kids who are just not going to be able to do anything. It is very easy to fall into that trap. Treat students like people, like you're trying to get to know someone, or treat them with the same amount of respect you would treat someone out on the street who you don't know, up until the point where you do get to know them. And that is a difficult balance to make, where you have to be in a teacher, not necessarily a friend, of course, but someone that they can get to know. But you also have to include discipline and a whole bunch of other priorities and yada yada yada. It's a delicate balance to strike. I definitely understand that. But I found that this helps a lot when connecting, especially in the way you speak. That most students are probably used to disciplinarians, where it's just do this, do this, do this, sit down, stop talking. If you treat them like people, it gets usually a lot easier to then say, like, okay, can we do this as a group instead of as I am laying down the law, which sometimes you have to. As a sort of side note to all this stuff, reading skills are a requirement for mathematics. That is probably the number one thing I saw in all of my education background and all of tutoring, that students need to be able to read problems. They need to be able to read content. They need to be able to just even remember words some of the time, which is getting harder and harder to actually enforce with the amount of just quick technology that's in their lives. That is going to be a problem. And that's not necessarily our area of expertise, but I have definitely found that that's one of the major things. Our next slide is on using clear and consistent communication. Use simple but accurate terms. I have very often seen where students will kind of know a concept, but they won't necessarily connect it to the wording that is being used on worksheets or problems, or even when being talked about certain things. So exponents is a good explanation of this. The word exponent could also be said as a power of some sort, or the square of something, or the cube of something, or the funny little number up at the top. I've seen that a couple of times. So exponents, if you don't know those terms, or if you don't necessarily connect them all together, it becomes a problem. One of the ways that I've thought to remedy that situation is to use only one consistent term in all of your instruction. Be able to say, okay, these are exponent rules. They're used on exponents, that's what these are, and just keep hammering that home. And then anytime something else comes up, you can relate it back to that thing and say, oh, that's just an exponent. That's another way of saying it, that's a different term, but it means the same thing. Once you have that sort of like central term, then you can branch it off into say, well, all of these things just relate back to that one central idea that we were talking about. It's also very important to understand when students use other terms and try to connect them back. And that, again, may be very weird things like, oh, that funny little number up at the top. Yeah, that's an exponent. Students can come up with wildly different terms for things. So it's very important to understand that when they say stuff like that, try to bring them back to the correct terminology, because that's what they're going to see on the test and in future classes. And when people ask them, like, hey, do you know this concept? They're going to use the correct terminology for it. Repeat key phrases over and over and over again. A big one that I had to do quite often was for exponents. When you have a power to another power, you multiply them. I just said that probably about 1 billion times. Because it was just a very common thing. Students weren't quite 100% sure of that idea, or they would confuse it with another one of the exponent rules that was more common. Find yourself like a little list. Write it down. Put down, okay, I need to make sure that they know all of these specific phrases. These are the common mistakes that they make. How am I going to go about correcting those? Try to shorten your phrases as much as possible to make them easy to remember and easy to repeat. Yeah, I just find this to be very, very helpful, and you will have to repeat yourself quite a lot. That's just the nature of the game. The more they hear something, the more students are likely to be able to recall it and repeat it. Fundamentals may need to be reinforced. This is, again, sort of the repetition thing. Yeah, some students might not know how to do the basics of mathematics, but that's understandable to a certain extent. Some instruction probably was not necessarily the best. Sometimes they just didn't pay attention. Sometimes they slipped through the cracks. If you need to reteach something, that's understandable. But be clear and consistent with it, in that you shouldn't just say, oh, you just do this. You should have some sort of a little plan in your head to say, okay, well, this is how I am going to go about doing this quickly and efficiently for fractions and for multiplication facts and for other sorts of things. I believe the next slide also might help with this. Using questions to guide down a train of thought, be that with, again, the fundamental concept we just talked about, or if you're teaching something new, or if you're trying to show them the big future things that may come up down the line. Questions, I found, are one of the best ways to get students to go down a specific train of thought. And that's why this gets the big stars, because I think this is one of the more important things in this entire presentation. Plan the train of thought ahead of time. You need to be asking yourself, okay, how do I know how to do this? What questions would lead me down the correct path? Saying like, where do I get my information from? Do I recognize any of it? Can we apply any tricks to this? Okay, then let's plug it in. As the end result comes out and say, is this the correct result? Is this reasonable? Is this the final answer that they want? All of those are very important things to be asking, and you need to sort of demonstrate that. But don't be surprised when students diverge totally off the train of thought. Sometimes it's very valid. Sometimes they're totally on the wrong track. Just be aware that students will totally go off track sometimes. Sometimes it can be very funny. But be aware of that, plan for it, try and get them back on track, or try and run with it if you think it's a decent train of thought, if it will lead you to a correct spot. Don't berate students for not necessarily knowing something when you ask. Treat it as an opportunity. Even if it's a very simple piece of mathematics, again, fundamentals. Treat it as you get to introduce this to this student. You get to show them a really interesting, neat little part of mathematics, hopefully quickly and efficiently. Even if you do know that they should have known this before, and if you've taught it to them before. Treat it as that first sort of opportunity. Sort of like I said before, the goal is to demonstrate the problem-solving process. Not necessarily to say, just, this is how you do it this way all the time, never look at anything else. But to say, okay, this is the process for how we're going to solve this problem using questions as a guideline. Because that is the more important thing to go about with a lot of this instructional stuff, is not necessarily to say, this is just how you do it, memorize it, forget everything else. But to give them a starting point, to give them tools, and to give them a way to build their own understanding through these things. And as a last little bit here, allow various methods. If your students find something that works, allow them to do it. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that as long as it's mathematically, sound. Unless, of course, there is something where later on down the line they have to do it this one specific way. Don't put down other methods, I would say. Don't say that, no, that's completely wrong. If it's accurate, say, okay, this is one way to do something. Sure, you found something that actually is kind of neat. But the thing is, in the future, we're going to have to do, X, Y, and Z, and it's going to be much more efficient if we do it the way that was instructed. That's how I would tackle something like that, because almost always it's going to be, yes, you do need to know the way to do it the way that, is properly instructed, but it is kind of neat to just be able to go around and say, oh yeah, that's something else that is also applicable here. Knowing content is very important. Yeah, and like I just said, master content, make connections. Having a higher level understanding of mathematics helps a lot. That is a tough ask, but that is kind of what my explainer videos will be for, to give you that sort of understanding of like, this is what it relates to. This is the way it actually works. This is the higher overall understanding, so you can then boil it down. What it relates to, what it feeds into, what it comes from, that sort of thing, which is kind of neat. Having that higher level understanding allows you to then say what actually is necessary. Is this super important and the key point of the lesson and you absolutely have to know it? Or is it just some extra detail? Having that ability to discern that saves so much time and energy in the long run. Which takes, practice, knowing the content, knowing curriculum, all that sort of stuff. And of course you might have predetermined curriculum, standards, goals, all that sort of thing, but ultimately it is up to you to be able to say, what do I need to focus on the most? In a similar vein, differentiation, great education buzzword. But yeah, being able to say, I know where these levels of mathematics are at. I know what I'm teaching. I know what's a little below that. I know what's a little above that. And I know how to bridge those gaps. to be able to say, okay, is this too hard? Is this too easy? How can I make adjustments to that? That all comes from mastering content and knowing where in the mathematics you actually are. And a lot of other educational specific stuff as well. I don't know how much of that I'll touch on, but knowing the math content certainly helps. This is fundamentally what my videos are trying to help with. Knowing the content, knowing how to produce it in specific ways. Using technology as an aid, but never a replacement. Generally, I put this in here to be able to say that, yeah, technology is great. I love technology. I'm using a lot of it right now to make this video. But it's never a replacement for good instruction. Because no matter how good a video is or how good a little interactive lesson is, some students will get it. Some students won't. Some students might connect perfectly and know exactly how to use the system. Some students may not at all. It is never going to be a replacement for a good teacher and a good lesson. One of the things I would definitely love to use are visualization tools. Namely, Desmos is my favorite. Desmos is an online graphing software, like a graphing calculator. It's got different colored lines. You can zoom in and out very easily. You can graph almost anything that you want. You do like statistics stuff on it. It's great. Totally free. They have a scientific calculator as well that's pretty nice if you're ever looking for an online version of that. I will probably use some of that in my future videos. There's also web whiteboards, like where you can draw, using a mouse or hopefully a tablet if you can. I found that to be very helpful as well, just because it's very quick and simple to clean up and reuse, and it saves paper. And a lot of things are moving to online digital production now. Most online tools or practice programs that I've found are annoying. It's somewhat to actively bad. Some of them are decent. Some of them are pretty good. Some of them are just have a couple of minor things here and there. I have run into many that students did not know how to use. It almost could not know how to use because the program is not set up in such a way that it teaches them how to go about anything. It's just, here are problems, do. Yeah. So if you are forced to use something, make the most of it. Try to find where are the errors, where are the things that are not quite as intuitive as you would like, where are the bad input methods. Try to make a document of some sort of reference for your students to say, okay, if you run into this problem, do this. Or if you don't know what this word means, do this. But definitely be open to realizing that a lot of these programs are not perfect. And instruction must be engaging in some way, shape, or form. And technology helps with that, to a certain extent. As I've said, you can visualize things, you can do a little bit of practice. But ultimately, the instruction in the classroom must be engaging to the student. That can happen a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be, oh, the lesson is fun, or the lesson is perfectly suited for every single student. It can just be that you are presenting it in an interesting way, that you are energetic and active in what it is that you're doing, that you know a lot about the topic and you enjoy talking about the topic. It could be that the lesson is very fun and engaging and has lots of different components to it and looks nice. Or it could be that you bring up an interesting reason why to learn the lesson. It's used in some other thing. It will be relevant in a future piece of mathematics. It's doing something cool in like actual scientific or engineering advancements or something like that. Depending upon your students and your content. But that is one of the more important things. Technology can help with that, but it can never replace a very solid, well-done lesson. And lastly, our final slide, why learn math? The age-old question. Why am I learning this? When is this relevant? When will I ever use this in real life? As a math tutor for 5 years, I very much had the leeway to be able to say to students, you're not going to use this. Like, you just won't. A lot of anything above like algebra in mathematics is just, no, you're not going to use this. That's not the point. The point of a math class is teaching logic and problem solving and perseverance, which we'll get to. But logic and problem solving are the two main things that every student can take away from a math class. The idea that given a very specific set of things, I can logically determine what the answer has to be. And problem solving, given that, okay, I might not know exactly how to do this, how can I tackle it? Is there a way around it? Can I think of it a different way? Can I draw a picture? Can I list all my information? Can I ask someone for help? All of those are great problem solving tools that math can teach. These are things that everyone needs. And as well, perseverance. The idea that given a hard problem, can you keep going at it? Given a hard lesson, can you actually put in the time and effort to do this thing? Ultimately, colleges are looking for perseverance. Yes, you need to know the content, right? You need to know math. You need to know English. You need to know science, whatever. But perseverance is really what colleges want to see. The idea that you can sit through all this stuff. You can get to your goal. And that's why colleges often look for extracurriculars and essays and letters of recommendation to show that this student isn't just, really good at learning stuff. They're actually capable of sitting down and doing something long-term and committing. That's what it teaches. If you can do that in a math class, you can do that in a lot of other places. Like in science and general understanding of things. Again, this is sort of where the logic comes into play. If you want to learn almost anything, you have to be able to say, why? Why does this work the way it does? Let me find the logic behind it. Let me try to understand what's going on here. That doesn't have to just be science. I put science, of course, here because that's the most closely related thing. But understanding why is school set up the way it is? Why are sports teams set up the way that they are? Why is my phone not working? Why do I have to pay taxes? These kind of large, overarching questions that they might see in a day-to-day situation can be solved by saying, okay, let me take in all of the information, process it, and try to find what the most logical answer might be. Sometimes that might even be just, let me look it up on my phone. Sometimes that just is the best way. But even then, you have to take in the information, process it, and say, did that make sense? Is that logical? That's what math is teaching. That's the goal. Not necessarily just 2 + 2 is 4. All right, and that is generally all of my educational philosophy. Those are my key points. I'd like you to keep this in mind as we go through the rest of the videos, because I probably will refer back to, asking questions of students, or, showing that math is not necessarily just about math, but about problem solving and reasoning, and that it connects to a whole bunch of other different topics. Thank you so much for watching. Please like the video and subscribe for things in the future. Hopefully I have a video on exponents coming out alongside this one, so you can check that out if you'd like. Thank you so much. I will see you in the future.